We certainly would like to welcome you to this next seminar. It is being presented by Help Your Mail and the International Model Car Builders Museum. And this is white paper kind of confused me because Mark never carries white paper. You understand what they call a legal pad. But then I took a look at his hair color today, and now I understand why it's called white paper. But having seen the work that's gone into the production of this subject matter and benefited greatly through the time I've associated with Mark and Bob, I think it's going to be more than beneficial to us all. And so without anything else, and no apologies for Mark's title, I turn it over to Mark and Bob and for your enjoyment.
Just remember, Brian, there's a price to pay for everything. Okay, yeah. Welcome to our session today. Bob and I have, over the last 18 years, we've presented a series of seminars at GSL about how to think about a major project, how to plan it, how to organize it. In previous white papers, we have presented much shorter versions of what we'll be talking about today. 4 years ago, we published another book kind of like this one. It's on the museum website right now. But it came to our attention and our decision that we needed to get serious about what we were doing, so we prepared an entire book. This is just a rough printout of it. This book will be available on a CD that will be distributed free of cost to everyone who goes to the museum tour tomorrow. So please go there, pick up the CD from the NGARs who will be proctoring that tour. So again, and on that disc there'll be some other museum promotional materials that we'll talk about tonight at the museum seminar. But this book is available there and will be available also as a free downloadable on a new site that we're creating after this of instructional materials and many of the presentations that you'll see here today that you can just go online and download these PDFs and so forth. So one way or the other you can get it if you want to. We have not printed hard copies because of the extreme expense of doing so. The copies Bob and I have here are, as I say, are quick, low-resolution prints, so we can keep our thoughts organized here today. So, with that background in mind, as Bob and I we worked together for years on these various topics, and we decided that we needed to think more comprehensively about presenting material that reflects our experience in judging GSL, in building models and so forth, and how to think about and detail and plan projects so that as they are built sequentially and come together in the final assembly stage, that you can minimize but will never eliminate the inevitable problems that seem to creep into how you finally get a model put together. So our presentation today will essentially be presented in two parts. Bob will first talk about how to organize and think about projects, including some great forms that he's developed. And then of course we'll both comment. I'll take over the second part of this with examples from my Dream Truck 2 project to show how parts can be thought about and created and integrated. So, Bob, please.
Well, welcome. One of the things that, and this tags in a little bit with what we talked about last night during judging, the seminar on judging, excuse me, but in terms of the scope and the planning of a project, that's the first thing that we addressed in this new book. And the reason for that is that you really can't complete a competitive model without that planning and without that foresight and really getting everything squared away before you ever start, and that includes choosing the subject, how you go about allocating your resources for the goals of the project, the materials that you're going to need, your workspace, all of those things that are not actually part of the physical building of the model, but that's what drives when things are done, how they're done, and finding out what you need before you get partway into something and go, oh God, I got to do more research, or well, how am I going to do that, or where am I going to find that information, or those parts, or whatever it is. So as part of this, you'll see there's a goals sheet up there. There are samples that we'll go through on the screen as I'm talking about the planning and the preparation part of it, and there'll be examples examples for a specific model that are filled out, just to give you an idea of how all of this stuff would be used. Now, the actual forms were omitted from the CD that you'll be getting tomorrow, but they will be available within 30 days on the website. There's a link from either the museum website or the GSL website. They are complete forms. Everything is for 8.5 by 11, and you can either use those, just download them as blanks and fill them out as you want, or use them as a basis for starting whatever you want to do, modify them, or create your own. It doesn't matter. But one of the things that we realize is that in building anything, it's a project, and it's not a hobby. At competitive building level, it's not a hobby anymore in that sense. And so it really has to be looked at as a project and a business, if you will. And so one of the things that's critical to any business or any project like this is the planning. So the first thing that we've got is a goals form, which is up there. And actually, before I get into that, let me give you an overview of the planning part that we'll be talking about. The first is the overall concept. You're going to need to decide what it is that you want to build and what you want to accomplish with it. And part of that is the goals. Then the next is the level of complexity, and this gets in again to what we've talked about before. What kind of contest are you entering? What's the judging based on? What do you have to build to? What level? How complex does it have to be? How detailed? All of that, depending on what the competition is that you're building for. Then you're going to have to do your research, your design, and your pre-thought about how you're going to make this thing before you ever start to assemble it. Now, obviously, everything's not as cut and dried as that, and it all overlaps, but these are all things that you have to think about. The first is you've got a time commitment. You're going to have to establish the priorities in the pre-build and during the build. And you've got to have a budget. Obviously, as the builds become more complex and more sophisticated, the budget goes up probably substantially in a lot of cases. And it's very frustrating to get partway into something and go, well, I don't have the money to buy that, or I can't get that tool, or how am I going to get that done? I can't afford it. So in at least recognizing those things and planning for them as much as you can before you get to that point, at least you know what's coming. And that goes a long way to smoothing the project. And then also how to integrate all of the elements that you're putting together and figuring out that you're going to need to do for this. And that includes everything from the research and the documentation through the final model and this presentation on the table. So that's really what we're going to cover in terms of the overall planning and the initial part of this. And then, as Mark said, he's going to get into the building part of it and the how-to hands-on stuff with the Dream Truck 2 as an example. So the first thing that we've got here is the goals. And can you go to the next one? I'm not sure. Okay, that's research. So the goals form was just basically an idea of what the forms are going to look like. One of the things that you need to do as you start your project is to decide what your subject is going to be. Now, if it's something that if you're building a model of something that exists, the research becomes very, very important, because if you're doing a replica, you want to build something that is as close to what the one-to-one vehicle is as possible. If it's a subject that is not a replica, but in fact is something that you're building, it may be a street rod, it may be a dragster, it may be a circle track, whatever it is that you're interested in building, heavy commercial, you're still going to need to do the research to find out what a vehicle like that is, what it contains, how it's built, what they really look like, what do you need to do to create a realistic miniature of that. So the research becomes very important. You do the next slide. This is the bug. That's out of what the Dunbar's Museum, I believe. And there's a lot of information available on all sorts of different subjects. That's where the internet becomes very, very important in terms of being able to do that kind of research. and learning, if you're not all of that familiar with how to do research on the internet, coming in with all the possible terminology that you can do the searches under, look for oddball or seemingly oddball sources for things. Sometimes it's almost reverse engineering. I was talking to Russell Cook a little earlier. He was talking about a particular one vehicle series that was built that he was interested in. And we were talking about how you do research and find out what was made and what was available. And one of the things I said was, well, if they were used for certain types of things, applications, who is supplying the conversions for those? And maybe you can go back to not the primary manufacturer, but maybe you can go back to somebody who is supplying the conversions for specific uses to that vehicle and see if they have any records of how many they produced and when they were done and all of that kind of stuff. So when you're doing the research and you're searching for things, you really need to start expanding your horizons and your parameters and look for unusual sources for material, because it'll come from just the oddest places, but there's always more to be found, and that's the kind of stuff that's going to give you the edge that you need in terms of building an authentic miniature. Next slide. Okay, so this is the point at which you've decided what you're going to build. And let me just leave that up there, but let me address something we talked about last night briefly in the judging seminar, and that is how you choose your subject. Now, one of the possibilities is, as we said then, pick something you're familiar with, something that is maybe a series of a particular brand or type or style of vehicle that you've built over the years that you're very familiar with, you really like them. You get to a point where you go, well, the next one of these that I build, I'm going to do this to. And that's an absolutely legitimate way to approach building a model for competition. It's something you're interested in, you're enthusiastic about, you already have a lot of research information and knowledge about. There are a lot of advantages to doing that. But the other thing as a possibility to look at is, what do I need to build, what do I need to put on the table in order to compete successfully against whatever else is in here, especially for Best of Show. And that may be a subject that you're not familiar with, you're not used to building. The example I used last night was a fire truck. Just because the opportunity for detail, for working features, in some cases the unusualness of it as a subject will capture people's attention. So you really have to think about what you want to do. And one of your goals is, to build a better one of what I'm already used to building, or to build a model based on what I need to do in order to compete successfully. And if you can compete successfully with the next in the series of what you're doing, then that's fine. Do that. But understand very clearly about what it is that you want to accomplish. This is, again, aimed at real hardcore competition. Again, Best of Show here at GSL is an example. So regardless of how you go about choosing your subject, once you've chosen it, you need to decide a set of goals. And so in this particular case, what I chose was a 76 Chevy Nova police package based on the Los Angeles Sheriff's Office markings and equipment. That's the original department that the car was developed in conjunction with, and it was actually a project that one of the writers from Motor Trend magazine, who was a reserve deputy sheriff, got involved in terms of looking at how other vehicles can be used for law enforcement use. Anyway, it's a somewhat unusual subject, and there are some historical details that would make it more interesting in terms of the presentation. So once you've done that, you need to start setting down a list of goals, the things that you want to accomplish for that model. Now, it may be something, the first one up there is to win the light commercial class at GSL 23, thank you. And that may be the builder's primary goal. And it's good to know that, because that's going to color everything that you do from that point on, because you're going to go, well, what did I see at GSL last time? What did the Best of Show model 2 shows ago, last time, whatever it is, have? What did that take to win? And that's what I need to do, not only that well, but better. And so it really does set the parameters of the project that you're going to be working on. So if that's what your goal is, it may be to beat a particular person. I want to beat so-and-so. He's always beat me at model contests this time I'm going to win. What do I have to do that? But again, it establishes your thinking. And it also begins to put it in a framework of how long is it going to take me to do this? What do my resources have to be? But it's those are the things that you need to start thinking about at the very beginning of the project, because that's going to have an impact all the way down the line. So that was the first one. Then there are other specific things that the builder might consider to be important in terms of what they want to accomplish with the model. And in this case, there's an S and a P. The P are primary goals. The S are secondary. It's good to be able to have a complete laundry list of things that you want to do, but also be able to prioritize those as you go along. So some things aren't going to be as important as other things are, but some things are going to be really critical. And you need to recognize those as you go through, so that when you're making those decisions, you go, is it a primary goal, or is it a secondary goal, or is it a tertiary goal? And the primary goals have to establish essentially the high end of your build. So it's very good to have that information and to be able to refer to it. Now, it never happens as cleanly as this. What happens is you start writing stuff down, I want to do this, whatever. And you may make a list, and then you may say, well, I'm going to change that, or this becomes a priority. So don't be afraid to rewrite the stuff. In fact, pencil is a great way to fill things out if you do it longhand. Computer is fine if you do it that way. But be prepared to change your lists, to reorganize things, rearrange things, reprioritize things. It doesn't matter, because what it is a tool for you to work with to build what it is that you want to build. And you can change it. You can buy new tools. You can expand your toolkit. So start with something, and it doesn't have to be 30 points or 20 points or 100 points. Just start listing the things that you want to accomplish, and then as you go, you're going to realize what your priorities are. So the goals form is a real good way to keep in mind and have something that you can reference what it is that your goals are with this build. Can the next thing? Okay. So priorities. Once you've got your goals, you have to establish the priorities of what it is that you're going to do, and you're going to have to do some things before other things. And again, you're going to change these lists as you go along. One of the things that you're going to have to do before you start building is research. So you've got to find out what is, in this case, again, because it's based on a one-to-one model or a series of one-to-one cards, what's really accurate for that? What appeared on those vehicles? In this case, what did LASO add to the vehicles? And then where are you going to get that? So there's a column that says notes, and in that column there's simply sources or possibilities, and then there's an estimate of time. And as you start filling in the time, you've got to be pretty accurate or at least seemingly realistic in the amount of time that you're allocating. You're not going to do that research in an hour. You're not going to call somebody at the LASO Museum and say, hey, send me all the material you got on the Novas that you guys did, because that stuff doesn't exist in that form. So you're really going to have to say, you know what, it's going to take me 15, 20 hours maybe to do this research. If you live in LA or you want to take the time and you're down there, maybe you go over to the museum and see what they've got. They've got one of they have the prototype car there, which is a really good source for information. But the fact of the matter is, you're going to have to allocate the time to do that. And to know that going in, you may suddenly realize, I can't get this thing done in 18 months. I can't get this thing done in time for the next show or for the next contest. But you're better off knowing that now than you are 6 weeks or even 6 months before the contest and suddenly go, God, no, I can't get this thing done. So by putting together a list of your priorities and an estimate of the amount of time that it's going to take you to do those things, that's going to give you a framework to work within. And that's very important, because it's going to reduce your frustration level substantially. So again, in this case, there are things not only in terms of research, but doing a conversion from one kit to another, maybe learning to work with brass, maybe learning to paint better. All of those things are priorities, things that you're going to have to do, learn, take care of in order to build a model. So that's what the priorities list is for. And again, this stuff will change as it goes along, but at least start writing things down, and if you've got a form, you've got a way to do it. You'll notice actually there's a little hole indicated up there. All of these things are designed so that they can be punched for 3-hole binders, and we suggest that you start putting together some sort of storage system. A 3-ring binder works really well. for all of this stuff. So as you print out the forms, punch them, put them into the binder, and then you know where the stuff is. There's nothing worse than going, I know I left those notes around here someplace and I can't find them and I need them. So organization is very, very helpful. What's the next slide here? Okay, research. So once you've got your priorities, you can take each of those points and begin to break it down into what you need to do to accomplish those priorities. In this case, research, again, a list of the things that you're going to have to find out, where you're going to have to go look for it, see what you can come up with, what the information is. It's not so much a matter of time in this, but in some cases you're going to spend money to do that research. It may be travel. It may simply be buying a brochure off the internet. It may be buying extra kits. It may be buying whatever. And again, there's a column there for estimated cost, and start putting that stuff in as you get to it, because budget is something that you're going to have to be dealing with as you go through this, and you're going to transfer those to the budget form. But it's, again, thinking in the overall scope of everything that you're going to have to do, and this is a way of organizing it. So that's what this is. What's the next one? Okay. The other is, another point on the research is to make sure that it's not. Oh, geez, I've been building the wrong thing. No, that's going to be the 76 Nova. But the, right. But the, there you go. This is actually shown because the point of this is to do your research. If, in fact, you're building a 1949 or a 1950 vintage, in this case, police vehicle, what was the equipment that was used then? It's not what it is today. 10 years ago, it's not what it is today. 20 years ago, it was very simple. So that, again, is the kind of research. In this case, just as an example, this is built by Carl Reese. The CHP logo on the door, there was no highway patrol lettering in California in those days, and they didn't have white roofs. And the reason I picked this up was because he had talked to me when he was doing research on the car to see if I had any information that he could use. But that's the kind of thing that you're looking for in terms of research. Just because something appears the way it does today doesn't mean that it always was. And so, again, the research is what leads you to being able to build an accurate model, and that's really what this is to indicate. So make sure that your research reflects what was being done at the particular time. Next, this is the Dream Truck 2. Mark can talk about this.
When I was a very young man, I started to read the articles in Run Custom Magazine about how Spence Murray and those with whom he associated built the Dream Truck. And I always liked it. I ended up, when I became a much older man, I ended up writing a book on it, the third edition of which will be out this year. But in the process of doing that, I went to Spence Murray directly. I talked to Gene Winfield. I talked to many of the people still alive who actually built the truck. Talked to Kurt McCormick, who now owns it. I talked to the guy who found it and restored it after its 1958 wreck. And I ended up having access to almost 3,500 photographs during its construction. Used many of those in the book. And in the process of doing that, I thought, somewhat arrogantly, but I thought I could do some of this better. I like much of the truck, and I don't like some of the truck. Make your own judgment call about whether I'm right or wrong about that. But from my subjective point of view, I can do this better, but I can only do it better if I do enough research on the vehicle itself so that I pick up enough cues so that my model, Dream Truck 2, can be seen as not a successor, maybe not even better, but as another, in this history I'm putting together, another man's approach, this fanciful man whose life I'm creating, might have constructed a truck just after, essentially the construction of this movie started just after the real truck was wrecked in Kansas in 1958. But to do any of that, I had to go off and do all the rest of this precedent work to gather the information together to see how, for instance, they built the frame, how they built the drop front axle. Eventually had semi-elliptics in the front and airbags in the front. They lowered the rear of it by simply putting lowering blocks in it. So I thought to myself, as for this new project I've got, if our fictional builder of this other version wanted to have a more performance-oriented vehicle that could be driven on real roads and driven more aggressively, would he have had leaf springs in the rear with lowering blocks? Would he have had a forged, dropped I-beam front end? And the answer to all of that was no. So I consulted with some friends of mine who are technically skilled, and so in working with them, we designed a front end with upper and lower control arms, a trailing on rear end. The model will have four-wheel airbag suspension. Remember, at the time, Ford Motor Company in 1958 had that as a rare option on the 58 Ford. So I've done the research on the 58 Ford and pulled out all that information about how they pressurized the system. The Cadillac system turned out to be much too complicated, and because I'm lazy, we're going with the Ford system. But the point of the matter is, the themology of the project required me to think about how I was going to do that, and I couldn't do any of that until I knew how the original truck was built. So this is the version before Bob Metz added the fins. This is not a well-known version, but this is essentially, well, this color reproduction doesn't work very well, but essentially another version of this color that I'm going to be using on my truck. So let's go to the next one. Here's the one after it was restyled. First of all, Metz added the fins in early 1957 back in Indiana. He painted it white, and when he got it back, Spence was very happy with the truck and so forth. But there were some glitches in it he didn't like. The prior version of this, the white fin version, had the rear quarter panel, which stuck out from the back of the cab more. So when he took this back to Barris, he had Barris tuck the leading edge of the rear quarter panel in. They took out the Buick portholes just forward of the rear wheels, and then essentially tore the truck down and repainted it. It's not the favorite paint scheme on the truck, but they restyled it as well as repainting it. They dyed the interior and so forth. And it was in this version that the truck rolled in Kansas in 1958. They were towing it with a Chevy pickup, and it blew out a tire, and the whole rig spun down the highway. So, and then after that, the truck was found, and it disappeared for essentially 25 years. Bruce Glasscock found it in Southern California, and they restored it. They got the original body and they back together, and they put it back together, and you know the rest. So, but the point about all of this is that because of the theme I wanted to create another dream truck, I had to first know about the first one. And I had to know about it comprehensively, so the decisions I made in building this new version could be in a historic context, so that someone looking at it could say, well, here's how this new fictional character designed a better suspension. And instead of the sort of the common 265 V8 that went in this, by the way, this had one of the very first Chevy 265s in it that came out of Murray's 55 Chevy, and it blew up. For those of you who remember the original Chevy engines, they had a design flaw in them. The 265s had a design problem. So we went to General Motors, and they replaced it with another engine, and he took the broken engine over to one of the speed shops. They rebuilt it, and he dropped that engine into his truck. But in my version, that seemed too common and too interesting, so we're using an inline 6 with a supercharger and a hydromatic transmission instead of the same old 283 in the 4-speed. Because this guy, our new guy, is a different sort of a character, and he wanted a more European flavor, a more sophisticated driver flavor to it. But again, not to belabor the point, but you can't do any of that if you're going to be serious about a project until you first do the research so that you can plant your model in terms of its theme in some kind of context, if that's your goal. Bob?
All right, and then, again, I'm not going to run through this whole thing, but on the DVD that you'll be getting tomorrow at the museum, there's a whole list of sources and possible places to do your research. So we've got all of that stuff covered in the book, and you should take a look at that. So the next one is scheduling and budgeting. As I said before, as you start figuring out what your priorities are and how long they're going to take, you're going to begin to develop a schedule. And what you're going to realize is there's a lot, and you know this already, but there's a lot of time invested in putting a model together. But it's just like the cost of it. You know, I don't want to know how much money I put into my real truck. That would take all the fun out of it. But the fact of the matter is the stuff just creeps up on you. And the same thing with the amount of time that I've spent working on it. So, but in doing it as a project and with a deadline of a contest of some specific at some specific date, you really do have to take a look at how much time it's going to take you to do this, and that's what the schedule is for. So, as you go through, what you're going to end up doing is allocating amounts of time that you think it's going to take you to do whatever it is that you need to do, research, learning new things, finding stuff, whatever. And again, there's also time warning, and that is you're going to have to do things in certain orders or certain sequences. You can't do some things before you do other things. And there are also going to be gaps in your schedule where you go, well, it'd be a good time to improve my airbrushing skills, or that'd be a good time to learn how to solder better in brass. But again, in having all of that in mind and having it written down, it gives you something to refer to, and it also gives you deadlines. It's a project, and one of the things that moves a project forward is to have small deadlines to meet rather than a drop-dead date of, April 30th of 2011 to be at the show. That doesn't really do you any good. So this, again, is a form, and it allows you someplace to write the material and the information down and figure out what it is you're going to need to do and when you're going to have to do it. So, again, that's included as a blank form. You can use this, or you can develop one of your own. But it's very important to understand what your schedule is and what your deadlines are. You may also want to do just a horizontal timeline in conjunction with this, start date, completion date, and then start filling in when things need to be done. But again, it gives you a visual guideline as to what you need to do and when you need to do it. Okay, next. Budget, it's the same thing. There's going to be money that needs to be spent. Some of it may be a lot, some of it may be very little, but, projects will nickel and dime you to death. You may also have things like you go, I need to go buy a new compressor. What? Oh, you may need to buy a new compressor, you may need to buy materials, you may need to upgrade your work room or your hobby room, wherever you're building stuff on it. And again, allocating a budget to that is very important, so you know what you're getting into, and also when you need to have it. Because if you're using discretionary dollars, your car insurance is due at the end of the month or of next month, and that's going to take away the money that you were going to spend on something else for the model project, then you need to know all that stuff going in, again, so that you can plan and you don't end up just getting buried in something that gets out of control. Next. Okay. The working features, that is, or working parts, again, that's breaking down stuff that you want to do, goals you want to accomplish, into the things that need to be done in order to reach each one of those goals. And this just simply is a way of further breaking it down, and again, allocating time and cost so that you're aware of the things that you need to address and that you need to work on, again, so that you can control the time, and you can control your investment, and control everything that you're doing as much as you can on the project. Let's do the next one. I can't see this angle. Oh, features and details. Again, this goes back, this is fed in part by the research. What was different in this case about this car, what was taken from other Chevrolet products and used on the vehicle, and in order to do an accurate replica, you've got to find sources for those, whether you have to scratch, pull them out with a kit or whatever it is. So again, this is just helping you sort of keep track of everything that you're going to have to do, and the things, either where you're going to find it or what you're going to have to do, and then if you're going to scratch pull it, how much time you're going to spend, and then that gets added to your schedule, and if you're going to be spending money, it gets added to your budget. But it's a way of feeding all of that information in, and again, an overview and control of the project. Next one. Skills development. Now, again, you might very well say, well, you know what, I'm going to have to learn to airbrush better. I'm going to have to learn to rub paint out better. I'm going to have to learn to make body panels with brass. I'm going to have to learn to solder. I'm going to have to learn to do this. I'm going to have to learn to cast in resin, whatever it is. So it's a way of tracking those things and how much time is involved. And if you look at it, you say, well, it's 40 to 60 hours, it's 10 hours, 5 hours, it was 20 hours back there, you begin to realize how much time you're really going to get into this project. And again, that's the sort of thing that you need to know so that you don't end up running out of time. The next one. Yeah.
Sorry. The next chapter, we're not going to touch very much on here today because it's, I think, well covered in the book. It's literally how to organize your workshop. There are some great pictures taken from workshops really from Europe and the United States including some local ones, about what kind of equipment you might need to buy, how to organize the space. And again, we're just going to touch on this briefly, but however and wherever you work, organize your work, keep separate functions keep functions separated from other ones. In my shop, I separate the bodywork area from the paint area because you don't obviously want stuff floating into your paint booth and so forth. Read the book. There'll be a lot of great pictures and a lot of comprehensive discussion of this. But think about the environment in which you want to build a championship model, whether you compete with it or not. If you have a goal of rendering an exquisite scale miniature as distinct from just a model, the place and the setting in which that would be created has to be managed and controlled and thought through and organized. So please pay attention to this chapter 6 in the book. We'll just flip through these pictures. These are just pictures that I've gathered. And obviously lighting is very important. Okay, here we go. Is that enough covering for you? At this point, in the book and in this presentation, we're going to be featuring some parts from my Dream Truck 2, only by way of example. Surely there are other projects that are probably much better than this one, but it is to discuss how you think about putting parts together. As part of this plan I've got to build this revised version of Spence Murray's truck, we're doing something other than using kingpin front end, for instance. So I mastered a spindle because this is going to have functioning ball joints. So I had to design the upper control arm. I made the master and had it cast in brass, hard brass. Did the lower control arms, cast those in brass, and then machined out the pickup points for the lower control arms, the upper control arms. And then once I bought some ball joints from Bob Bentley, and they're in 25th scale, and they will knock your socks off. They're just, I couldn't make those in 500 years. But in order to do that, the outer pickup points, the ball joint pickup points in the control arms had to be machined. But if you're doing all of that, then you have to, and since this truck would have Buick brake drums, disc brakes were very rare in 1959, so you go to Buick brake drums because they were probably the best, they dissipated heat best, and they first came online in 1958. So on the far left, you create your master and then cast it and then machine your spindle, which spindle in turn is then integrated with the Bendix backing plate. So you have to go find out how first of all, you got to know how a car goes together, and then pick your area, pick your equipment level. So the Bendix backing plate was then mastered and cast in brass. And then on top of that, I went to Cody Grayland, who machined the Buick backing plate, the Buick drum, which drum then fits over, as you would find it, fits over the Bendix backing plate. There's probably a 2 or 3 thousandths interval there, so that they go together, anticipating plating and painting. Then the rim is two-part. Now, real rims aren't two-part, but there's no tire, maybe excepting Alan Rabb's new versions, but there are no tires which are sufficiently flexible to pass over a rim. If you're going to have a very delicate bead, if you're going to have an authentic bead rather than a thick, clungy bead, which would be that thick in scale. So, again, one of the compromises I made was to design the rim so it was two-part. And when it goes together, it'll be held together by some CA glue. You'll never know the difference because the mating joint is hidden within the body of the tire. So for all functional and aesthetic purposes, you won't be able to tell the difference. Let's go on. I wish this picture was better, but this is essentially the assembled rim and tire from the back side. Each part pins and integrates with every other part. Now, this backing plate doesn't have, obviously, all the bolts and the hookups for the brake lines and all of that. That will be added later. But my purpose here was to see how these parts would fit together and to determine what my intervals were. Look at the outside diameter of the Bendix backing plate to the inside diameter of the Buick brake drum. Okay, it's very tight, and it needs to be, because if you were to go to a real car, it's going to be probably 3/16 of an inch, if that. And you start to blow that down into 25th scale, and that line will virtually disappear. Well, it can't disappear because then you're going to have to force it together. So as Keeler taught me years ago, you have to fudge it. You have to think about appearances as much as scale realism. If you mean by scale realism, literally a computer-calculated interval. So this has to look right, but it can't be too big and it can't be too small. One of the next things you have to think about, and again, we're jumping through a very comprehensive set of photographs here. We're just touching on, and all these photographs are in here. This is my New Age Mercury I did for Scale Auto a few years ago. One of the problems with Vinnie JMT kits is that the floorboard on a body and frame car was integrated with the frame. That's not the way real cars are built. So you have to think about what your subject matter is. Is this a body on frame? Is it a unibody car? Is a classic version? It's probably a body on frame. So in this case, I thought, well, I'm going to try a new approach. I'm going to integrate the interior tub as the newer AMT kits are doing, but this is based on the old 49 Mercury. Take the interior tub and made it to a floorboard that I cut out from the kit frame. So I took two frames, whacked the frame off of one and whacked the interior off the other, and then did a lot of scratch building to pull them back together. So and then modified the floorboard to fit the particular requirements of this model. I lowered the rear end, not with lowering blocks, and the mufflers are tucked up under the body because the car is lowered, and all these issues. So this interior bucket, if you will, on the top, fits up into the body after the body is painted. Well, to do that without stretching the body, popping your bodywork, or leaving gaps, you have to test fit it 4 or 5 times to take out the intervals. And literally, it's about a thick piece of paper between the outside diameter of this tub, if you will, and the inside diameter of the body. And that only comes by putting the stupid thing in a dozen or more times as you're building it. You just have to keep testing it. And then you have to think, well, how are you going to get it in? You can't just spread the body and make your fist and pound it in. So in this case, you tuck the rear end in, it slides in, then you drop the firewall down in. Because otherwise, you're not going to get it together without damaging your bodywork or chipping your paint or doing something else nasty. So this is not the only way to do this, but this is one way to do it. Then in this case, I cut the frame out from the 49 Mercury kit, added the front clip from AMT's 60 Starliner, because I wanted a more modern front end under it, and then modified the frame to fit this fictional floor pan, and then made sure in the pre-painting stage that the top side of the frame was very close to the underside of this floorboard, so that when it was all put together, it's going to look, at least have the appearance of being realistic. You notice the outboarders I added there from the 60 Starliner kit. While it's not bolted together, little miniature bolts, fake bolts, if you will, attach it, because that's how you put real cars together. That's how you put together a body and frame car. This is an early version of the Dream Truck 2 frame. For those who have visited the website I have on it, well, let me back up. When I built the model in Car Model magazine over about 5 years, it's too long an article, and I didn't like it as it turned out. It was really stupid, frankly, and it was too big an engine, and the frame was silly, and it was just dumb. And it irritated me so much I decided to critique it in the magazine and then tear it apart. And so I disassembled it, and I first made a plastic frame to sort of determine what the spatial relationships or mechanical relationships were. And then I determined, as this ongoing evolution of this project in my mind, as I fleshed out the themes and so forth, I decided that I needed to build a brass frame. I had built one once before, but it was not good. So I thought, as I did an article in Car Model magazine about this, let's scratch build a frame. So I first had to determine what my set points were, what my parameters were. So I roughed in a plastic frame because it's very quick to work with. And the reason it's quick to work with is it has no strength, and it'll warp and tweak, and you can't attach anything to it firmly. So I first prototyped the frame in styrene and putty and everything else, made a series of tracings off it, traced them onto 15 thousandths brass, cut them out with, you can buy shears which are not left or right, you can just cut them out. And as I detailed in that article, I then started to solder this together, built my cross members. I determined that I wanted to have a trailing arm rear suspension. So you had to build a cross member with brackets that pick that up in a motion, do you see? And you've got to think about all that before you ever start construction. Bob's right about that issue. It's not just you have to think about your research and the parts you're going to need, but you have to think about the details you're going to need to get this together and make critical decisions early enough that you hopefully don't have to go back and redo things later. So you'll see that this axle down here has scratch-built trailing arms, and they are soldered to the rear axle, and they go into place. I turned to Cody Grayland to machine some parts for me because I'm just not that good. He built the mufflers and so forth, and did the upper and lower control arms. If you ever taken apart, will somebody get me some more water, please, back there? Just take one of these, would you please? If you've taken apart an A-arm, for any car that has it, there's a control arm, a pivot point that goes through it. That pivot point has threaded ends on it. those threaded ends then fit, you tuck them inside the pickup points, the inside pickup points for the A-arm, and then it's secured by a bolt, a very specialized bolt, which is hollow on the inside, which has threaded shafts, and they thread onto it, how you assemble it. You slip it through the frame. Thank you. This is really crude. This is this control arm that goes through the A-arm, this pivot point. It's a cast part usually. It has two pickups threaded, they end up being threaded shafts that come off of here. That's what bolts to your frame pickup. And then out here, these things are externally threaded. The bolt, if this is your A-frame going through like this, then there's a bolt, I don't know what the technical word for it is, it's a hex bolt with internal threads, with a zert fitting out here so you can lubricate this joint. So I decided to do that in this case. So this piece has threaded ends on it, and this thing here has internal threads. So this thing literally bolts together. And so I had to first had to build the A-frames and predetermine what the outside dimensions were. And then these shafts here attach to an upright bracket of the frame. So it goes in like this, and remember, in real world, this thing pivots here and here. So that's the way the thing pivots top and bottom. But you've got to secure this pivoting assembly to the frame, so you put these things on and they bolt through and you run nuts on the inside of the bracket that comes vertically off the frame. If you look at the front of the frame here, let me try and see if I can hobble over here. This is the lower A-arm pickup bracket. It's a right angle bracket to the cross member. And it's drilled in an appropriate place so that these bolts slip into there. And then you run a nut down on the other side. I've got to thread them yet, but you run a nut down on the other side, and that's how you secure this assembly. And then, of course, out where the ball joint's attached, you do the same thing in the upper control arm. In this case, the lower control arm pivots further inside to get away from steering problems. The upper one pivots further outside. That's just one example of what you have to do. But in order to get to that point, you have to think through mechanically what you're trying to do, and then to start to design the project and to allocate resources and materials and so forth so that you can pull it off. But all that determines is dependent on what level of detail, what your goals and image of the model is. I want this to be a very sophisticated, largely, almost exclusively scratch-built frame with working steering and sway bars with brackets and all the rest of this. Let's go on.
Did you give any consideration to steel grease for those bolts?
Oh, jeez, I knew someone was going to say that.
You have a microphone? Somebody can be on focus.
Well, why don't we do this at the end, because we've got so much material to cover. This is a very early version of the body before I re-restyled it. But you can see at this point I'm starting to tuck the frame up under it to see how this new scratch-built brass frame integrates with the plastic version I did earlier. And I found there were some anomalies. When you trace something, you never get it right on. That's just the nature of things. So I started then at this point to see how this frame would integrate in the body, because the goal here is that when the model finally goes together and all the bits and pieces are plated and painted and wired and bolted into place, this complete frame has to fit up, the body has to fit down onto, it has to go together as they would do it in a factory. They assemble cars the way they do because it's an effective way of doing so. It's not some arbitrary decision to employ UAW members, as much as it may seem that way sometimes. But they do it because there's an established, reasonable, plausible way to put cars together. So if we're going to be serious about what we're doing, you essentially have to mimic that process. Whether it's body on frame or unibody, replicate to the extent possible in scale how they put things together and then miniaturize it. Don't build models of them, miniaturize the process. So at this point, I'm trying to determine how I'm going to integrate how the frame will attach to the body and how the relationships of the parts are. So I'm starting now, when I had to go back and make many changes. The inline six cylinder is going to sit very far back in the frame to get a better weight ratio. So I had to hog out the firewall to determine the spatial relationships. Let's go to the next one. Here, you can see down the upper control arm here down at the bottom. You see these bolts? They go, these nuts, these special kind of nuts that go over the threaded shaft and then attach. There are as many parts to hook up these control arms as there are in the real car, because I went out and I did some research, and I found out, looked under one of my cars, and found out how these things were done. They exploded parts drawings, if you don't know anything about it, on the internet. They're all over the place. And you literally start to replicate these bits and pieces. Now, the engine at this point is starting. The engine has been basically roughed in. I built my the frame mounts for the engine, and you can see how the lower control arms now are starting to hook up. This is the pre-ball joint version of these spindles. We're starting to machine those now. But to do that, you see, as the wheel assembly goes onto those spindles, then you have to fit that assembly into the body to make sure there's not tire-to-body interference. If you're replicating something, you can just simply mimic or reproduce what the real car is. If you're building a custom vehicle, there's an added level of stuff you have to worry about. Now, will this clear the fender well? Are the front fenders wide enough? If they're not, you're going to flare the wheels. But you'll never get to the point of knowing that and avoiding embarrassment when the thing finally goes together and when it's lacquered and it's too late to change the bodywork, unless you pre-fit everything to begin with. This is the radiator for again, it's a multi-piece setup. These brackets out here on either side have been integrated into the bodywork because they are the guides that will locate the front of the frame, and those are essentially the radiator brackets that will hold it and secure it to the frame. Those are now into the body because this thing slides up into the body and there'll be appropriate bolts run and so forth. The big center section here is just a shape to determine, so I can determine how high I could make the radiator, because this has a sloping nose on it. So you've got to think. So I built models when I was only a few years ago. You try and close the hood, and the radiator wouldn't clear the top of the radiator. I mean, it's absurd. And it was a failure on my part to think through how to build that part. So this blank, if you will, this brass blank, which is attached to the lower part of the radiator and the top part with brass rod. So it goes together every time, and I can then put it in the body remember the frames have been pre-fit to the body at this point, and I've got the hood made. I now can kind of close everything up and see if it's too tall. And if it is, you file that thing down. That blank becomes, when you're satisfied with all the measurements, that blank becomes the outside dimensions of your radiator. Now, of course, the radiator won't look like that when I'm done, but you have to first establish the spatial relationships. This is the master cylinder, and I turned to Cody to make this. Went out and did some research on what late 50s, early 60s GM design master cylinders were like, and he machined the parts for me. But you notice what I've done here. This mounting plate over here on the right will be integrated into the firewall. You won't see that as a separate piece, but you'll see the 4 holes. The purpose of that is that I know where that part goes when it's painted. And I know that up front because before I paint this thing's going to get screwed and bolted together so that I can check a final time every last bit of part relationships and wiring and plumbing and all the rest. And I needed to have a place that I could determine reliably would be the location of this master cylinder. And you can't do that unless you think through the process. And the easiest way to do this is just to make up a blank over here out of brass stock, drill it so that it picks up the mounting points off the master cylinder. That becomes part of the firewall. Master cylinder goes in, you run. These aren't going to be threaded. They're going to be, the bolts are going to be placeholders. But they'll attach with hex head bolts with the crown on them, and they'll look like the real thing, and I can reliably determine where that goes together. Now, if you're going to build a unibody car, boy, these photographs,
Well, isn't there a control on that to darken the contrast?
these are kind of washed out. Well, it's getting better already. Oh, much better. Oh, excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Jeremiah. By the way, credits to Jeremiah. He did all the digitalizing of the photographs in this book, and Paula Nagnostopoulos put up with Bob and I and laid it out. And boy, that was a challenge for those. Anyway, these are unibody parts or cars where the exterior body shell is integrated with a structural floor pan. Do you see? And if you're going to build this model realistically, or subjects which have a unibody theme to it, it's a construction and a mechanical theme, You literally have to build your platform, determine what the basic components are, build your body, and then integrate them together and assemble the models through the door. Now, that's a problem if you've got a hardtop, because then you have to predetermine where your door pickups are, how your dash is going to fit, and all the rest. All those issues have to be predetermined. You have to think about how your glass is going to go in, and if you have to make moldings on the inside, do all of that. All the interior bodywork has to be done. Your seats have to be pre-fit and everything else. But the point is that when this goes together and you show a unibody car, the doors will bolt on after it's painted, the seats go in and click into place and all the rest. All the components drop into where they ought to be. And none of that can occur unless you've thought through, first of all, determine whether your subject matter is unibody or body and frame, and then determine how you're going to build it. This is a considerably harder way to build a model than a body on frame, as you might imagine. But it can be done. You just simply do the old ship in a bottle routine. But that only works unless everything's pre-fit. Those guys that build those ships in the bottles don't just build parts inside the bottle, I'll promise you. Everything is pre-fit and predetermined. They just essentially click into place. Oh, we're back to the engine now. At this point, further parts have been made for this. And you can see this is an early version of the Hydromatic, the GM Hydromatic, pre-cooling line version. Because remember, this engine in our fake story was built in 1958. So I had to go off because I wanted to use the Hydromatic was a 4-speed automatic that General Motors developed. And I had to go off and figure out what version of that transmission was available in 1958. Because I'm going to tell you, when this model's done, smart guys, historically minded guys like our friends up here, Dave and Tom, are going to look at that and they're going to come to me if I haven't done my homework and they're going to say, you screwed up. Because Hydromatics in 1959 didn't have cooling lines. They did later. Do you see? And you did, Dave. You knew that. But you see, I want to pass muster with gentlemen of their knowledge and capabilities and caliber. This has to be a project which is internally cohesive. So I had to go off and do research. What does a Hydromatic look like? I finally went to Hemmings Motor and it was about a manual. No shop manual, grease, and Lord knows what was on the cover. But it had exploded parts drawings in it. And so then all the parts were made out of brass. And there's a bell housing, and you notice the bell housing has integrated bolts. Those go in the back of the block. Run bolts, not threaded bolts, but just run placeholder brass bolts. The intake manifold goes out. There are freeze plugs in this engine. You'll press in the freeze plugs. The elliptical front timing cover has been made, you see? Cody made many of these parts. And then, in talking with Bob, who's doing the photo etch artwork for it, again, it's part of the custom theme of this DT2 logo he's designed for it. I thought, well, if you're going to have a custom car, you're going to have a custom valve cover. You're not going to go grab a factory stamp sheet metal, whatever those things were. Look awful, they had lumps and bumps all over them. You're going to have a freshly designed custom valve cover. And so I sketched a couple of things and sent them to Bob, and he made them look good. And so on the valve cover, it has this in-cut line that I'm going to flow a little bit of paint into after it's chromed. This, there's going to be the oil fill cap in the front is going to has a reveal machined into the top of it with a photo etched DT2 logo will drop into it. It'll be relief cut, and you'll flow the body color into the DT2 logo, which drops inside the valve, inside the oil fill cap, which fits into the top of the valve cover. Well, if that's the case, then you've got to worry about the height of the top of that. And so at that point, I had to bolt the thing back together again and determine, with the hood closed, because at that point, as the hood comes, the valve cover's like this and the hood's coming in this direction. I don't want to get to the point where I can't run the fill cap and the model's done. So when I determined there was interference, rather than redesigning everything, I desoldered the engine mounts and moved the engine back about 2 scale inches. Had to redo the firewall, which is part of the process. But in doing so, I have solved that problem, which problem never would have, in using Bob's form, the good thing about what he's designed here is that these are forms that you can amend. Because I had no idea there would be an interference problem on that question. I had no idea about that at all. Until you put it together and start to build all the pieces together and determine, not theoretically, but practically, that there would be interference. Do you see? Anyway, I'm belaboring the point. Let's go on. Okay, he's going to switch tapes on us. So 3 really talented, if I might say brilliant people. Bob is the guy who does the artwork and pulls it together and advises me about themes. The ideas are mine, but the execution is his in terms of the artwork. Cody Grayla has machined many of the parts for this because I'm okay, but I'm not Cody Grayland. And Mark D. Jones, whom I don't see here, is going to be doing some of the instrument fascias on this and so forth, the decals that fit behind these 4-piece instrument bezels, okay? Before you turn the tape on, I just wanted to give credit where that's due. Are we back on? Okay, this is a vintage General Motors generator. Remember, this is 1958-59. It's as part of this initial theme that I had for this truck. So I went to the junkyard and found a Chevy, a late 50s, they said, or so, and compared this greasy, disgusting thing, took it to a car wash in the home. I couldn't even bring it in my house, and sprayed it with gunk degreaser and cleaned it off so you could even get near it. And then took it home in my shop and cleaned it up further, wiping down his rags and so forth, and then took dimensions off it and compared it with a shop manual, a Chilton shop manual I'd purchased years before, to see what the details were. Now, this is not obviously a functioning generator, but as I took it apart, actually my mechanic took it apart with their tools, we had to figure out how the image of a generator could be created. And so, those have the old linings on the armature. The case has a machine opening it to cool it. So I thought to myself, if this is going to look realistic, some smart aleck's going to look through that and want to see something that looks like copper. The armature is machined of a piece of copper, okay? The pulling and the fan that goes on the front of the generators are all machine parts. Everything else is brass, and the thing clicks and pins together. This bracket down here needs further refining. It's way too thick for scale. But that bolts to the side of the lower block, the position of which was determined because my mechanic friend Mike Smith and I went out and found a 292 Chevy engine. And we spent a whole day and took measurements of it and figured out where the pickup points were for the generator. The generator is mounted low on the driver's side. So we had to figure out where that was and what the brackets looked like. And then, so instead, because you can't make a generator, well, I can't make a generator, and maybe no one else can, in 25th scale, you mimic the appearance of a generator. You see? Because you can't, it'd be hard to, I guess, to make one work. Dave, you probably could. But I don't know how that could be done. But you don't have to either. You mimic the shape of it. In this case, some of the motor parts are starting to go together now. You see the cutouts inside the block where we determined the freeze plugs were. There's an insert that goes into the block. Again, when I paint the block, because this is brass, you have to coat it with etching primers. You can't just put lacquer primer, it'll flake off. And I didn't want the gap between the outside of the freeze plug insert and the block to be obscured by paint. So the freeze plug insert is a machined recess that goes into the block after all the primers are on. And then one quick coat of probably a urethane paint, because it's very durable, goes over the top. And so when you look at the side of the block, you're going to see that that line is sharp, because on a real car, the line is sharp. It's not obscured by sealant and 50 coats of enamel and so forth. There's the 6-cylinder distributor down here that Cody made, and the starter down here, GM starters here, and you can see the coil. But this whole engine pins together, pins and male and female, and it all goes together like this. And with it, as this engine becomes increasingly complex, it bolts into the frame. There's a transmission pickup point that bolts in. The motor mounts bolt in. You run these little miniature bolts that Bob Breschauer makes. By the way, they're down to 1/25th scale and 3/8 head section. They're just incredible. And they're made out of pretty tough aluminum, so they'll hold up to a little bit of abuse. But as this process goes on, you can see how this is going to work. Go on. Okay, now we're in a project that's still in the quite crude stage. This is a way of thinking through how to put together a dashboard and a unibody car. This dashboard has pickup points, one of which is the heater motor over here, which goes through a recess in the firewall. You don't want to have to squeeze a tube of glue in anything and attach the firewall, glue the firewall to the body. So it has to hook up to the body mechanically. Then you have to think, well, what does that mean? You're going to put big bolts through and run kludgy bolts through your unibody? No. Figure out what the mechanical functions are, and then mimic them and hide your pickup points in mechanical function. So the front of this firewall, if you take the dashboard out of it, the front of the dash insert is all brass, and it has a piece of tube of appropriate diameter soldered to it, which fits inside this hole. You see, I still need to do some work with respect to tolerances, but that's the way you locate it. And then the dash from the inside is held in place in terms of elevation, because otherwise it would rotate down on the driver's side. It's held in place with a console, which clicks into place on the floorboard and tucks up underside of the dash. So the dashboard goes in first after it's all assembled, and then you locate the movement on the driver's side by tucking this console piece in. Okay? And that way you don't have to have glue. No glue ever has to get in there to obscure details or screw up your paint or just look awful. This is an early version of the headliner for Dream Truck 2. Again, and that's a body-on-frame model, obviously, as you know. But in order to pull off the headliner, what you can't do is to tape off the outside and paint it after the body's painted, or paint that first and tape off the inside and just spray some paint up into there. That's not the way that's not how you build a realistic model. So because you can't actually upholster that, and tuck things up under the windlass and so forth, I've made an insert. And this insert literally, by friction fit, clicks up into the side of that body. Because the theme is late 50s, early 60s in terms of how long it took to build, it's got narrow pleats. Well, those are just pleats for a styrene kit you buy. And I just cut it to shape, determine what that was, and then you see out here on either end, those integrate with the inside of the A-pillars. All right? So this is like an upholstered unit that clicks up into the body, and I've determined an assembly procedure. This, after the glass goes in, we'll talk about that in a minute, how the rear glass goes in front and rear, and plated photo etch trim goes in. Then this thing clicks into place. Then the dashboard goes in, not before, because you can't get this in with the dashboards in the car. This has to go in first after the glass and trim are in. Then this goes in, and then the seats click in. You notice the reveals here. Those fit over the top of the seat insert. So that not only is it stylistic, but it helps locate the seat. So it's a 6 or 7 step process to put this thing together. Here it is kind of clicked into place. This is from about 3 years ago. It has since been refined somewhat. But you'll notice that by doing that, you can also run a light up there. This is going to have a functioning courtesy light. So the top of this insert, I just took a small round file and filed a line in, a reveal into it that you can run the small wires down through it, you see. But you never see that because it's tucked inside the back of the B-pillar. So this thing literally is held in place. No glue will ever have to touch this because it's held in place by the friction between the outside diameter of this insert and the inside of the body, and by the fact the rear seat will click into place and hold it up. Oh boy, this is kind of a bad picture. Again, this is still in the quite crude stage, but you can see the seat now in place with the headliner in place, and this thing just fits in, do you see? One of the things we talk about in the book, in this early photo, is if you're going to do glass in something, and you have the privilege of doing a model with flat glass, which it certainly is, make it glass. You can buy from any place. Let's wait till the engine so I can cover this. You can buy slide glass. You can buy it in 6 to 20 thousandths thicknesses. 10 to 12 thousandths work really well. You get a carbide scriber. And when you get the glass, you hold it in place carefully, you can sand the edge. You can literally polish the edge of the glass that thin. So in doing that, how does a real truck, do we have the next photograph? Go to the next one. Do we have that illustration? No, go back if you would. It's covered in the book. How does real glass go in? Well, there's a channel in these vintage vehicles which in cross-section goes like this. The inside channel of which is not as deep as the outside channel.
Why don't you just pass this around, and I need to go back, but that's the drawing style.
So again, I went and looked how a real truck went together. The inside channel is thinner because all it has to do is to receive the chrome. The outside is deeper, that is with respect to the bodywork, the in-cut, because it has to hold the weather stripping, the glass, and the trim. So you simply make this out of, you can buy special shapes, you can buy all sorts of brass shapes. And I bought some T-channel. And bought it wide, filed down one side, bent it around the opening. And so when I sent Bob down the drawings, that, as he knows, very crude drawings. And Bob then does the artwork. So the inside trim, and you'll see it down there, has miniature Phillips head screws relief cut into this brass surround. Because in those days, they used Phillips head screws. They didn't use flat screws. So again, you got to know something about trucks. So after the truck is painted and before anything goes into the cab, this inside trim, front and back window, go into place. They will have been polished brass and then nickel plated, because again, it wouldn't be chrome, it would be kind of an aluminum or stainless steel look. Then on the outside, you will have cut your glass with the scribe, and I'm using 12 thousandths. And then that goes in, and you paint the channel. Before that, you blacken the channel to simulate the weather stripping. Then your glass goes in, and then your chrome, this plated photo etch trim goes over the top of that. So when you look at it, you've really sandwiched glass in the way the real truck would have been done. No, it doesn't have actual weather strip that you pull around a piece of glass, obviously not. But it's a way of mimicking what the appearance of that glass would be by using the real thing, and by using photo etch. Let's go on to the next one. Okay, now we're on to something else here. And those of you who work with brass know the virtues of it. I got frustrated 20 years ago when I built that mid-engine 36 Fords in that delivery, because except for the back door, every panel on that is plastic. The working panels on it. And I got it painted with lacquer and everything worked. Nothing fit. And it just about made me crazy, because I wanted to get the panels thin enough, rather than big, which in real life would be this thick. You've got to thin them down. And by the time you got them thin enough, lacquer, because it's chemically hot, warps things. And so I talked to Keeler one day, and he said, "Mark, you idiot, make it out of brass." And so from then after, I decided to make these panels out of brass. Well, it sounds like a sort of arcane black art, but it's really not. And the book details how to put this together. It's not an article. But you cartographically trace your part, whether it's a factory part or you make your own custom part. Trace it on masking tape. Make the relief cuts. Remember, it's cartographic, so you've got to make your cuts. And then the book shows you how you hammer it. The hood on the right, can you brighten this any? Are we at the brightness limit here? I left it up in the room. Jeez. No, we're not going to get there. That's all right. Don't worry about it. But the fact of the matter is the shape on the right, which, if you can see it, and I have it upstairs, I should bring it down, literally has all the curvatures of a 49 Ford hood. The brass shape on the right, which is a duplicate of what I used to make this hood, is a standard AMT 49 Ford kit body, kit hood. The interesting thing about that hood is that if you build a factory, it's got that deep bullnose on it. And so you have to start hammering from inside and move outward as you stretch the metal. But even a shape that relatively sophisticated, and only relatively, can be made with you can move fairly easily with a repousse hammer and a piece of flat brass. I don't use forms or anything. I just free hammer. And I base those skills on what Wingrove taught me years ago when we were reading his books and so forth. I think that's it. Is that it? Okay. So again, as the book details in much greater complexity than we've been able to do here, I show how to build the frame, basic soldering techniques. There's a whole article here about how to apply lacquer paint, how to rub things out, and so forth. But the key here is to, as Bob pointed out earlier, the key here is to think comprehensively about your project and plan it. And when you start construction, you have to think about how the real thing is built. When you built the Duesenberg, you went and saw the real car, and you replicated what you saw. And that's the only way to do it. You've got to, and since, though some people are doing it in quarter scale now, you don't have to make it run, but you have to make it look like it could run. That is, and you have to anticipate shapes and sizes and mimicking and inducing the eye, seducing the person who views it to make him or her think that it's a real vehicle. And the best models do this. So this is just our take on how to put such a model together. Jim, get up.
Yeah, I seduce people all the time looking at my models.
Yes, you do.
I don't think that I would ever use this whole process that you're setting out. However, I'm going to use these forms, and I just wanted to add to your discussion here. I come up with ideas as time goes by, and I write them down on little pieces of paper, and I stick them in a folder. And like right now, in between projects, I'll take that out, and I'll go through all these little pieces of paper of all these different ideas I have. And I think these forms that you came up with will really be good, because I'll put those projects on these forms, even though I may not go through the whole detail of the cost and all that. But it would be really nice to have those projects on the forms and organize them, maybe alphabetical. But I can I can read them faster and understand what my idea was.
And one of the things, again, we just sort of, did a survey of what's in the book, but one of the suggestions is if you store these in a 3-ring plastic or a 3-ring binder, get like those plastic pocket sheets that are punched for 3-hole. You can drop your form into the front of that, and behind that, you can put all of your original notes. So that you don't, because that, I do the same kind of thing. I have file cabinets full of stuff, not only, models, but for graphic design and ideas and, a morgue of material that other people have done. And quite often an idea is, I don't put the entire idea down on my, whatever form I'm using for something like that, but I get enough information that I know why I kept that other stuff that's in that file. And then I don't have to worry about transferring all of that information. It's all there. But again, I'm not a big computer guy. I really like, handwritten 3-ring binder kind of stuff. But that said, it's a great way to be able to put together the material for the project, because it's very frustrating to get partway into something and go, what did I do with those notes? Where did that go? Well, I know it was taped up there to the wall 6 months ago, and so this gives you a way to organize. And you start a binder for each one of your projects. It really does help.
And buy a series of 3-ring binders for this project, and segregate some into research or into mechanical components or paint issues or whatever you're going to do, so that you can. The thing that frustrates me is my time is somewhat limited when I get off work and so forth. I want to be able to go and not have to rediscover where everything is, as Bob points out. I've got to be able to go grab it quickly and get access to it for the next stage of the project. Jim?
Yeah, a couple of comments. On your glass there, you could actually put weather stripping on if you got the right size of miniature wire.
You'd have to strip the wire out and then split
You have to very carefully split it down with the scalpel, pull the wire out, and then you can have that.
Every time I've tried that, though, it wanders. And it just, with these hands, it just goes all over like this.
It's all that glue you've been sniffing.
It's all the VOCs.
That comes with the territory.
The VOCs, dude.
The other comment is, I notice you're building all of these parts, and the bodies are essentially all plastic.
Not mine.
Well, some of them are.
Some of them are.
And my point is that instead of hammering all this stuff out, there's a much easier way to do it. And it doesn't cost that much to do it either. If you take your part and you make a hydrocal or ultracal mold of that part, you can go on the internet and you can buy conductive silver paint. You spray your piece with conductive paint and take it down to quality plating or wherever you go to do it. If you have a jeweler who does plating and uses other metals than silver or gold, most of them won't touch anything unless it's silver or gold. But you can then take and take it to the plater, and they put it in the tank, and they build it up layer after layer, and pretty soon you have a completely three-dimensional solid piece of brass with all of the detail on it that you have.
That's all true.
And it is the most incredible way to build a model, and it's really not that hard to do. If you can cast a piece of, if you can make a cookie or a cake, you can cast ultracal or hydrocal to do that. The other comment I have, and a question, and I don't want to embarrass you, but it's time for you to quit relying on Cody for some of your parts and do it yourself.
I agree.
Because you have the capabilities to do it.
I don't argue that.
So 2 years from now, I don't want to see any Cody Grayland parts. I want to be able to see a model that you can enter because you build it.
I agree with that.
Okay.
I don't disagree with that at all.
Yeah. All right. Anyway.
By the way, what book Augie did on machining for whatever the company was is a terrific book to start with.
Oh, it's an absolute great place
Wonderful.
to start.
I agree with you.
And one other comment too. The last one is when I built Dodge Fever many, many years ago, I was attending college and I had a very, very limited amount of time that I could spend on model building. So every second of every day was important to me, and I had to plan out every single detail. And what I did was I used 3x5 cards that I could stick in my pocket, and any time of the night or day I always had a rubber banded bunch of 3x5 cards, and an idea would hit me in class or wherever I was at, and I could stop and I could write that down and then be able to take it into my shop and work on the car.
I have a stack of those on my nightstand. My wife says sometimes I sit up in bed and write stuff down. It's just weird. It's completely weird.
Well, what kind of stories are you writing?
Model stories, dude. Chaz?
Beautiful work on the truck. But over time, you said you started back in 92?
3.
Okay. With this such time on the design, I know, you were saying that you want to do a subtle difference to the body, the chassis,
Yeah.
everything like that. Did you ever find yourself over this much of time of drawing the truck back out in 3D form and changing little things? Because I mean, the design of technology of today of custom builders is way different than
Sure was.
20 years ago.
Sure was.
And trying to implement little different things that might stand out a little bit.
I thought about that, but as Bob will attest better than anyone, I can't draw a straight line with a ruler. So I visualize things by looking at them and handling them. That truck has been restyled 2 or 3 times. Most recently, as shown up in his excellent illustration, I've introduced some V-shapes to it and so forth to clean it up and make it look more stylish. But I have a concept. I can see things in my mind, but I can't draw them with the darn thing. So I'll go directly to the piece and I'll start sculpting and change things. And if it doesn't look right at any particular stage, I'll redo it. And that's what I've been doing. But I wish I could draw, but I can't.
Well, why I ask is because I know a lot of people can visualize what they want to do. But it's like anything else, when you draw it out, putting it on paper, it looks totally different. It could look wrong, it could look right and stuff.
Well, with me, it would only look wrong, so that's the reason. I go to the thing itself.
I was just curious on that.
That's how I do it, and it's probably not the best way. You're out of juice.
It's dead.
You're done.
I'll talk loud.
No. Pass out there.
All right, thanks.
Thanks, Steve.
One of the things, and this is sort of a compromise, if you will. One of the things you learn is, if you do artwork, two-dimensional drawings just never, I mean, it look pretty realistic, but it's not the same as three-dimensional stuff. It just doesn't live in space the same way. But even if you're not particularly artistically inclined, if you can take on a 3x5 card or pad or whatever it is, or piece of paper, and even sketch out and label your notes, so you don't lose what it is that you were looking at and go, that line's just not right. What if I curved it more, or I made it a V, or whatever it was? So, there are always compromises like that you can make. There are ways of keeping records and not losing your thought or not losing that idea. And then if, you're somebody that it just works better in 3-dimension, at least you can go back rather than going, there's nothing more frustrating than going, I can't remember what it was that idea was. So it's not a matter of specifically having the skills of being able to render it or draw it or use a computer or whatever. Just get yourself, make enough notes or information for yourself that you'll remember what it was you wanted to do when you go back to work on it in 3-dimension. And that's really the key to this. It's a matter of gathering information and what you want to do and reminding yourself so you can do it.
Dave?
Hello.
For those of us who do want to make a 4-view drawing, or who do want to conceptualize on a scale model, I just happen to have with me some of my notebooks, and I can spread those out on the black table up here in front of you, and you can spend as long as you like. You've got all the time in the world, and you can read through this stuff. You might be interested.
Please do so at the end here, absolutely. If you haven't seen Dave's work, it'll just blow you away. Any other questions?
I have a comment.
Just good to see you. Yeah, go ahead. It's just good to see you.
Bob, I want to thank you for your comments here. You're bringing classic project management techniques into the realm of this particular activity. When you get into the business world, a lot of these major projects hinge on the fact that they use these techniques of project management that Bob has outlined here, because they just wouldn't be possible otherwise. In fact, a lot of projects, the people who actually manage the project management process are professionals in that particular area by itself without having any knowledge of what they're putting together or they're organizational specialists.
Yeah.
And I just want to say that I've thought about some of this before. It does get complicated and it can distract you from that, but you have to be prepared for that, because I believe this process here is all about expectation management and managing your own expectations. And one other point is you need to make sure that you share with significant others in your family the commitment that you're making by putting these projects together as well.
That is. That's true. Steve?
Yeah, Mark, you have commissioned a lot of the work. Cody Grayland's a great example. So would your project qualify for GSL? Well, putting yourself as the organizer aside.
Aside from that ethical question,
Yeah.
as current rules are written, yes. Because we do, and the issue first came to acute attention to us when Schwenkler, back in 80, whatever it was with that motorcycle, did all of the CAD drawings, sent them out to Cody, and Cody machined them all. And sprockets and gears and all this stuff, and he put it together. That forced Bob and I to look at the question back in the day, and we had no rule against it, so it was permitted. I mean, if you don't prohibit it, it's okay. Subsequent to that, we've come to the conclusion that whether you base it on a kit or buy parts on the aftermarket from a manufacturer, or commission them yourself, in any one of those three cases, the builder didn't do those parts. And so from a functional point of view, there isn't much difference, aside from cost issues, if you commission them on your own, trust me. But in terms of assessing whether the entrant builder constructed those parts, there's no difference, because in neither case did that person do anything at all. Now, when you get into something like our two gentlemen in the front row here are, in your case, it's like 95% scratch build, and yours 100% scratch build. And Randy Durr is doing something right now along those lines. But aside from, and as Steve Captain did years ago with his belly tank, that is 99% scratch build. Aside from doing something like that, we're all essentially in the same envelope. Now, whether anyone decides that commissioning parts is appropriate and fair is a question every contest has to deal with. But my view about it is, and it's certainly possible I'm wrong about this, but if I use a kit body, I'm taking advantage of $250,000 worth of Summits tooling, and which I could never afford to do on my own if I was to build a model based on a kit. If you're doing something scratch build, of course, it's a different question. So from that kind of thematic point of view, in neither case does the kit-based builder or someone who commissions parts in a different position.
But I do...
Let me follow up first.
Okay, so is there some point at which we draw the line? Because I believe we have drawn the line at paint jobs.
And assembly.
And why wouldn't we consider a paint job as a component of a model?
Because
someone else can do it?
It's a process.
The paint is the component. The process is the application of the paint. And to be very clear, if you're commissioning parts, a sprocket, Cody's not building that completed sprocket. He's building the pieces, and then the builder of the model is assembling them. And that's where we're making that distinction. And it's a fine line. I'm not arguing that point, but that's the clarification Mark and I had to come up with in terms of where that is. Because it's essentially the same thing as buying a kit and taking the parts
Or
from
an
that
aftermarket kit.
Or an aftermarket
You
kit.
can buy aftermarket machine parts all over the place.
Right. It's just a matter of the source, but the fabricator of the parts isn't the assembler of the parts. And it's a distinction that we make, we're very clear about. Now, I do want to make one other point about this. Yesterday in judging, we were talking about risk-taking, and we were talking about what's more valuable from a judge's standpoint. And if you had two models that were essentially comparable, and one had outsourced parts, machined by Cody Grill, not to pick on Cody, but Cody did it, or Mark did it himself, and the results were equivalent, then it would have to go to Mark because he did more on his own model.
We've made that call several times.
Exactly. And so again,
all the time.
you're rewarding that risk-taking, and you're rewarding that competence and ability to build, and that's part of what we look at as judges. So it's very important.
And that decision comes in close cases, where you have two models built to an equivalent level, and in case A, the guy built 90, not 100% of it. In the case 2, again, when the models are equivalent, because the goal here is the achievement, not the process of achievement. So if the models are equivalent, we reward the guy who invested more in the process. And those kind of cases are somewhat rare, but they have happened here, and we've made the call in favor of the guy who does it himself. Let's get to Jim first. Jim, make it quick, and then you get to
I think I totally disagree. If Cody Grayland is making a bunch of parts for you, what needs to happen is in racing and all kinds of race cars, in order to, drag racing, for instance, back in the 60s, in order for a car to be able to compete in certain classes in drag racing, the factory had to build or homologate X number of cars. So for you to be able to compete using Cody's parts, Cody needs to make and sell.
Yeah, but that punishes me because I've got a checkbook.
Well, fine, but
No,
it's...
but wait a minute, but that's what you're saying.
No,
but you see, Jim, you're wrong about that, and respectfully, because you know how much I like you. But the fact of the matter is... Really? No, I do.
That's news.
No, the hell it is. Look, I've learned much from you, but respectfully, you're mistaken on this point, and you're mistaken for these reasons. The fact that I commission the parts and have paid Cody quite a bit of money to do them, if we homologate, whatever the word is, if we offer them for sale in the aftermarket, or whether we don't, from my perspective, it's the same use. Now, if Steve wanted to go to Cody and have him make the same part, Cody might do it, or some other qualified machinist might do it. But I wouldn't want to penalize Steve for using a part that is a one-off if he assembled it and finished it. I'm going to plate these parts myself and paint them and put them together.
Yeah,
and
but
so,
you should make that part the whole thing.
but that's a separate question. You're right. I don't disagree with you about that. But, Jim, that's a separate question from the one Steve raised. Because if we're talking about what is acceptable in a competition, it doesn't matter if you buy it from Aluminum Specialties or if I use a one-off. Because in neither case did I make it. In neither case, if you were to use one of those resources, would you have made it? Or Steve or anybody, or Jim, whomever.
Well, I just think that everyone should be required to fabricate.
Then you have to prohibit kit bodies.
I mean, well, not really, no.
Well, of course you do. No, to be consistent, Jim, you're obliged to do that.
No, you're not.
Because you can't take advantage of a kit part. You didn't do that either.
Because you've got classes where the whole hobby is based on essentially plastic kits. Yeah, homologated kits. That's what I'm
But in
saying.
neither case did you build the body if you based it on a kit body. Now,
that's
if you're
true.
Tom Kern up here, who scratches the whole thing,
Yeah.
he's and Dave, almost to the same degree, they're creatures apart, okay? But if you're going to use any kit-based part, if I buy an MT, this new Revell 44 Coupe or whatever it is, I'm taking advantage of $250,000 or more
Sure.
in R&D and so forth.
Yeah.
I could not possibly afford to do that. But should I be penalized? So
but
is the
you
difference
could.
only that Steve buys it and I could do
But
it?
you could, and you have the skills, you could just fabricate.
That's a separate question from Steve's question, which is whether it ought to be permitted in competition.
I don't think it should be.
But on what grounds?
Because you
haven't
fabricate.
You don't
or
build
make
the body
parts.
either.
No.
Then what's your point? I'm getting a little extra. I'm sorry. It's the lawyer in me. Yeah, right. But the point I'm making is in neither case did you build the part. Whether I commission it or whether Steve uses a kit-based part, in neither case did we
Yeah, but the
fashion
big
it.
difference is that anybody can go out and buy the kit-based or
Only because they've
homologated
socialized the cost of the tooling.
part, you know.
Only because they've socialized the cost of the tooling, in which case I'm penalized because I would have checkbook big enough to pay Cody.
Yeah.
That's the only difference. Now, if you want to have a contest where only Tom Kern and Dave Cummins can enter, that's cool. There's a lot of merit in that. But you have to understand there'll be 10 people in the room. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be,
Yeah.
sorry.
No, I'm not, that's just my opinion.
I understand.
Yeah.
And
Everybody should fabricate as much of their own parts as they
then
can.
don't use a kit body.
Or if they have parts that are available on the aftermarket, if they're already existing and you buy them.
Here's how I solve the
that's
problem.
ours. That's okay.
So here's how I solve the problem. I go to Norm Weber and I send him this engine.
Yeah.
And he puts them on the market. Am I permitted to use the Brassmaster then?
Sure, why not?
What's the difference?
Because it's not the resin engine that's available to everybody else, it's a brass, so why
I'm using the brass one.
Yeah.
So do I have to buy a resin cast in my engine and use it?
I don't think you should be allowed to commission parts.
So but I can satisfy your objection by having Norm Weber cast it.
If Norm Weber casts it and sells it to everybody, so everybody can buy it and put it in their car.
So here's the deal. I bear the master costs. God bless Norm. He sells them and makes a profit, which he certainly should. His work is exquisite. And so that means that I can now use commissioned parts that I paid $5,000 for?
But they're available to everybody.
So
now.
what?
Yeah, Because the whole,
That just means that you've socialized the cost of
the
things.
whole concept of this thing.
Sorry, we're just going.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
We got to pew. I'm sorry, guys.
all right.
but a great presentation.
Enjoyed the discussion.
Okay.
He and I have done this for you. You might think this is personal, but we've been doing this for 30 years, so I mean, we've been thrown out of restaurants together. I mean, it's, truly, we've been pitched out of restaurants.
Yeah.
Please don't take this as any animus between the two of us.
No, there is no animosity.
There's none at all.
Stupid! You said I can't believe you're doing this.
Now we're going to start Tony.
Anyway, thank you all for attending.
We'll come up and talk afterwards.
Thank you.